I more easily identify myself as a maker and more easily identify myself as someone who makes places, makes companies, makes services and makes meals for people when that's necessary than I do as an academic. And I kind of accidentally fell into academia because I started this company kind of when a big project I was working on with the NWDA kind of went a little bit tits up as they demised in 2009-10. We started a company on £4,000 instead of 11 million. And it was a slightly different approach, as you can imagine. So instead of doing the kind of 11 million capital flagship project in Carlisle to give workspace and incubators to support makers and creatives in Carlisle, that the NWDA said was entirely necessary, we kind of went, well, what's the minimum viable workspace for Carlisle? What can kind of deliver impact that isn't just the same shonky artist studios? And we started it on £4,000 business loan with kind of 10 rooms and a makerspace and a Reef graphics studio, and kind of 6 months in, it worked. And we became kind of the classic big fish, small pond. We were the go-to experts for rural digital economy and how to make this thing work. And we talked to the city councils and we talked to the county councils, and we started to kind of preach the vision of open data and preach the vision of this is what a fab lab in your community will do. And somewhere around about 2009, 2010, I went to one of the NESTA Hot Topic talks. And as you do, you meet people and they give you opportunities. And with some money from my in-laws, on a loan I've still not paid back, I went to the Manchester Fab Lab to do the Fab Academy, so I could be a guru. Like, how cool is that? I could be a guru for this new digital economy, and I could kind of do that thing and be the expert. But somewhere near the end of the course, as the Fab Lab flooded and the costs of paying a member of staff to cover my role and the travel of 60 quid a time from Carlisle to Manchester, and my husband being made redundant, and the break clause coming up and the city council conversations about scaling and doing this next premises started to stall, I kind of thought maybe the business plans, maybe the visions, maybe all of this stuff that I can string together really articulately into very convincing things, maybe that's snake oil. Maybe what I'm actually doing is peddling snake oil. So when I got the opportunity to do a funded PhD and was lucky enough to be accepted, that's what I went to go and have a look at. I wanted to look at the snake oil. I wanted to go and look at the promises of the maker movement, the promises of the open data community, and kind of interrogate them a little bit and see what are these grand claims, what are we actually delivering, and kind of who's talking about it and where are they talking about it and how are they talking about it and why. So over the past 3 years, I've looked at promises, I've looked at grand claims, and I've done various projects to kind of test the bounds of things. And I'm lucky enough to have done some projects that I believe in, not just ones where I'm kind of going, oh no, I think this is all snake oil. Because I don't think it's all snake oil, but I do think there's an awful lot of hype around this thing. So I'm presuming everyone is familiar with the maker movement and with this kind of exponential rise and this explosion of makespaces, fab labs, hack spaces, as we wrote about in the kind of April publication we did with NESTA when we put together the open dataset of UK Makerspaces. But there's this kind of gap between the rhetoric, which is kind of what we say about things and how we say it, and the reality of what actually happens, objectively or subjectively. I'm not going to go anywhere near the philosophy of reality. Or the research and the kind of what's documented and observed or trialed or tested. And these things all relate and they all overlap, but they're not necessarily equal and they're not viewed as equal, and they influence each other, but we're not necessarily always transparent about how. So you're familiar with the maker movement, you're familiar with this kind of exponential growth, you're familiar with the kind of big ecosystemic changes and the opportunities of computation and all that stuff. You know this. You're part of this. We can plot Aaron on there somewhere.
2008.
Yeah. And we can plot the kind of rise of the spaces and the new spaces and the kind of different curves of what influences what, when, where. It's all just bad data science when we do. And we can plot it by who does what, when, and why, in what countries, and what are the differences, and who invests in what. And then we can also plot the research, and we can look at kind of what's being referenced when, and who's quoting who, and do these curves match those curves, and things like that. And this is to explain why we've got 1847. This is Ruskin and Morris, and those sorts of bits of research do still get quoted and still referenced when you're looking at the maker movement, when you're looking at this, because we're kind of dealing with labour, we're dealing with work, with how people make, how we produce, things like that. And you can kind of look at the relationships, and all of these are terrible graphs and they're bad data science. I'm not going to come to this audience and do real data science with you. I am not worthy. But one of the interesting things is the claims. And so over the last 3 years, I've put together a data set, which some of the graphs are based on, but I'm not quite ready to publish openly yet, of the claims and who said them and how they were funded. And you kind of think, well, what's the risk? Surely, like, we all know making's good. And making together is really good. Like, what's the problem with people saying that making these grand claims? Surely that's not an issue, because if it means that we all get to make and we get some money and we get to do this thing and we open access, why not? But then you look at the kind of scale of the grand claims. Like, I particularly like this one. This is 2006. The maker movement will solve the world's health problems. Like, that's pretty big. I'm not sure I want to be liable for that. And then this one's kind of reoccurrent and kind of often cited and things like that. And the maker movement will emerge as the dominant source of livelihood. And I don't know about you, but that's an awful lot of responsibility. So like the next time there's like a fall in GDP, that's your fault. And the next time that growth doesn't happen, then clearly like STEM and the maker movement just hasn't lived up to what it said it would do. So I kind of think all of this is kind of dangerous and just kind of a little bit snake oily. So I separated out the different types of claims and I started to kind of label them. This is entirely subjective labeling. So the kind of claims with the blue line of the kind of personal empowerment, the red line of kind of economic growth, and the industry and production, the kind of the influence of maker movement on manufacturing. And then also the kind of social justice claims, and then this nice little line at the bottom, the overthrow of capitalism. And one of the things you can see is that like the overthrow of capitalism has these kind of interesting peaks, usually corresponding to financial crises, but kind of never quite reaches a momentum where you can really say the maker movement will overthrow capitalism. And you've got this kind of steady and rising claims about manufacturing. I'm quite lucky at this point because I work as a research associate at the RCA, looking and testing that claim about kind of future makerspaces and manufacturing. So I'm not going to comment too much on that because I now realise how little I know about that area. But the one thing that's really steady throughout is this kind of rising exponential claim about economic growth and about kind of how you guys, you're the future. There's no other hope. There's only one last thing, and that's us. And I think that's terrifying. So I kind of think, having looked at this thing for a very long time and making some entirely very subjective judgments, because frankly I feel quite comfortable doing it with you guys, and once I've cited it a little bit further and proved it a little bit further, then I'll publish it as a PhD. I kind of think that a lot of this is capitalism, and it's just a different type of capitalism. So there's kind of two types that I think are kind of really evident through the claims and through kind of what's actually happening. So there's one called net-article capitalism. So it's this new segment of capitalist class where it's not dependent on owning intellectual property rights or controlling them. It's just about the development and control of participatory platforms, which might, I think you can imagine the participatory platforms in question. And then the other one is called Vectorial Capitalism. So Vectorial Capitalism is where you kind of control the things that control the flow that makes the thing possible. So the classic way of doing this is you build the infrastructure and control the infrastructure, and then when the big idea is realized, you are the only ones who have the infrastructure. You're the ones who control the flow. And so if you look at kind of Autodesk, they have this kind of 20, 30-year vision where they will kind of build the infrastructure and the desire will kind of come along at the same time. And they will be the only people who can control that infrastructure in the future. So they're kind of vectorial capitalists, same as kind of Musk and if you build the infrastructure for the electric cars everywhere, then you control the infrastructure, you can exploit it in that way. And I'm using a lot of the references in that very, very rough, quick and dirty analysis are kind of press, and it's kind of mainstream, and it's those sorts of things. But the research community is just as bad. Like, we have our own motivations for making these grand claims. And this one, I think, is a lovely classic, with the making revolution is even more powerful than we imagined, generating up to 18 billion and 298,000 jobs for the UK economy. And do you know where this is from? Is this familiar to anyone? So this is from here east, which is in the Olympic Village, and it's a makerspace, and it will be the hub of the maker community. You might not know about it yet, but you will. And obviously, this is the Olympic legacy, and the Olympic legacy being pinned to the maker movement, as somehow the Olympics caused the UK to raise its profile sufficiently that makers got inspired to move here and make here, and it gets a little tenuous. So essentially, I'm just going to leave it there and say that we need to look at how people are counting and why they're counting things that way. And there needs to be not necessarily a wholesale skepticism of the maker movement and of open data communities and the promises that we make, but just a little bit of calmness, a little bit of scrutiny, and some blunt reckoning with numbers. Thank you.